Hello, I'm Daniele Fontani. Here with me there is Andrea Marcelli. We are today talking about how to port WPF application to MAUI. Of course, MAUI is a young framework, but of course we will need to do that in our real business case application. So we are from Italy, as like Carrie already told, and we work in Senior Consulting, and we spend a lot of time working on .NET and WPF technologies. We are all today for talking about the porting of a WPF application, of course. We will start describing how the use case. Of course, we cannot port a real business application, but we find a simple application, a toy application that we ported on MAUI, and that was very, very useful for learning what was the complexity, of course, and all the problems that come out when doing such kind of activities. So, what was the application? The application, as I told, is a toy application. Is one of my open source projects, and it was the right candidate because it wasn't something that had made to be fired or to lose our job for something that went wrong. So we started from this application, safe application, simple WPF project. But what do this application? It's a simple tool that want to resolve some problems, some issues on the application development. I'm talking not about native application development, but the web application development. As we know, the JavaScript is a good way for implementing an application, but it's limited. It's limited because the browser supports only few things, and we cannot have all the opportunity of a native application. Think about reading files or understanding who is the user that is logged in. So our idea is to solve this problem. And of course, there are solutions yet in the market like Electron that let you take a single page application with React or Vue.js or something like that and embed it in an Electron app. But this solution for us doesn't resolve the problem of build the application, deliver updates, or creating many US-based version of the application. So, from my point of view, doing that is useful for who is a web developer because it's comfortable to work with the same tool, but we lose most of the advantages of having a web app. So the idea that I had is, why don't we create a safe application that's basically a web server that stay on the local machine of the people and expose APIs. So in that way, your web application through the browser can access it via API anything you have in the PC. So of course, the answer to this is that it's probably not safe. It's not what browser is intended for, and probably is not a good idea. But it seems too nice to do it, and we are doing that. So we have this WPF application that implements a simple architecture where you have the browser. In the browser, there is a single page application developed by every web developer. Web developer integrate through API to our client that receives on the local machine and exposes API. So, like happens in your phone when you accept the permission for giving the opportunity to an application of using camera or something like that, the web application asks for permission and the user accepts it. And then the web application, the website can read files or delete files or doing things in the local PC. So that was the application, and that application was implemented in a very simple way and has four four main features. So a UI that let you see what are the settings you have in your configuration. An API server that exposes API, like reading the file system or creating user or something like that. And you have also an authentication system for making the things a little bit secure and safe, and it is also extensible. So this is the application, and we needed to take it and port to MAUI. Why this? Because in our mind, it would be great to have it on any possible device. Of course, we will discover that there are some limitations on the concept of all possible. But what we will do is to port this on all operating system, and most important, play with MAUI and make a port from WPF to MAUI, because we think, of course, that will be essential for most of the applications that are made with WPF to join this new framework and unlock all the opportunities and capabilities that this framework give us. So now it's time to give space to Andrea, that will introduce the most important highlight of MAUI, and will explain what we have done and which point are important to remember doing a porting like this one. So, okay.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Andrea, and very much like Daniele, I come from Italy. I've been working with him for the last 4 years and mostly doing WPF development, and it's been quite a journey, I tell you. Before going into any further details about the porting, I'd like to show you some of the main points about MAUI. You may already heard some of them, but it's quite a new environment, so it's always better to refresh them. So, as you may have heard, .MAUI is a totally brand new framework. It's multi-platform app oriented, and it's been made from the ground up in order to optimize what was already present at the time of Xamarin Forms, which is actually still right now. So if you are developing multi-platform applications, at the moment you are still using Xamarin Forms, but .MAUI is really just around the corner. So if I'm not mistaken, it should be out in November 2021, so it's quite soon. And the advantages you have over the older framework is, of course, you have the UI controls, which are built from the ground up and with optimization in mind. And also you might find that it is completely combinable with other .NET ecosystem members, such as, for example, Blazor, that will actually allow you to create sorts of hybrid apps, and that's a very interesting concept. So moving on, as I was mentioning, .MAUI is coming from Xamarin Forms as an evolution of the latter. And its main strengths are based on some good selling points, I'd like to say. And first of all, I'd like to mention the fact that as opposed to what we have seen in Xamarin Forms, .MAUI employs a single development project experience. That is to say, you have, of course, different platforms that you are probably addressing. And these different platforms used to have their own resources folders, as well as their own projects inside the Xamarin Forms solution. This is no longer true for .MAUI. We have just one project, and this, of course, helps us avoid code duplication. It provides for a better code reusability, and that's of course one of the main selling points. Of course, we also have more compatibility with modern features, such as, for example, hot reload, which is just now being introduced, and that helps you make code changes on the fly And on the one hand, we have NET MAUI, which is totally compatible with this one, while Xamarin Forms seems to be still a little bit lagging behind. It's only XAML compatible with Outreload. And these are, of course, the main points. You can also read some more facts on the internet. There is a very good interview online, which I will link later. So moving on to the porting, I will mostly be technical about this, of course, as the porting is of a WPF application. Many difficulties are to be expected, and we will see later what I'm referring to. And it's of course listed in the following slides. So we are going to talk about the project scope. Again, started with NET MAUI, the very first steps, and how the development environment is set up, the project structure, and some of the most important aspects of the project, with which it wouldn't function without. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a WPF developer, as I already said. So my background is totally grounded with that technology. I've been working with it for the last 4 years and I've become quite adept at it. But I never tried any other framework, any other more modern framework. And this, of course, is very limiting. And this is what prompted me to try and do this port in the very first place. So what this presentation actually aims at is introducing .NET MAUI to someone who is grounded in the past mostly and working with WPF and such technologies, which are now becoming more and more obsolete. When you're getting started with .NET MAUI, the first thing you might notice is that there aren't really many resources online as of yet. Of course, we are talking about cutting-edge technology here, which is a very new framework, and I've been programming with it by using the earlier preview and not the release candidate. And there isn't really much to be found online, just the official documentation and, of course, the GitHub page. And before getting started with it, of course, you have to set up the proper minimum requirements. There are just a few of them, but for example, you have to develop using Microsoft Visual Studio 2022 preview or later versions, which is to say up until version 4. And otherwise, you won't be able to actually program any .NET MAUI application. And in order to search for anything, any actual doubts that you might have while developing, you can always check for Xamarin Forms resources that are quite extensively covering any doubts you might have regarding .NET MAUI. But when first setting up your development environment, you can go through various routes. Of course, you can install all manually by simply downloading everything you need, or you can rely on the console tool that we have at our disposal, which is called .NET MAUI Check. So this tool is responsible for checking the environment and making sure that everything is up to date and properly set up in order for you to program your .NET MAUI application. It's very simple two-step way. So first you install it, and then you simply run it, and it's an interactive tool. You go along with it and eventually say yes to everything it's asking. So this is an example of what the tool does for you. In this example, it was detecting that some of the workloads were not either installed or up to date. And as you can see, this current screenshot is showing a Windows-based OS, and that's no mistake. I just want to show you that, of course, it's a multi-platform environment.
Sorry to interrupt. We're hearing very loud clicking and typing sounds. Would it be because it must be very close to the microphone? Maybe.
Okay.
Would be possible to stop that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no problem. All right, so it's done. So setting up the development environment, we've had some initial issues, which were probably due to the fact that we started back in August, I'd say, and we were not even in a release candidate state with the .NET MAUI. So what I found was that we didn't have really any project templates for creating the projects or pages templates, and this was already brought to the attention of developers, and I think that's already been solved later on in the development phase. And while I was developing it, however, the problem was still on, so I had to find some different ways of solving it. Of course, you can always go the command line route and simply create a new MAUI application by using the following line of code. Or maybe you can rely on the wonderful .NET community and install a Visual Studio extension, which simply added what was missing. And as I was saying, I later found out that starting from Visual Studio 2022 preview version 3, project templates and pages templates are now finally available. So this problem should no longer hold, but I like to mention it because I encountered it while developing, and of course during the development time and the presentation times, things have moved quite fast. So some things have changed just a little bit, but just enough to make them a little bit obsolete already. So as I mentioned before, one of the main selling points of the framework is, of course, the fact that we have a simpler and more optimized solution. For example, here on the left, you see a typical Xamarin Forms solution displaying all of the different projects, while on the right, you have the .NET MAUI version of it. At this point in time, we still had the double projects, which means one of them was for the Windows application, and the other was for all of the other platforms. However, this thing is now completely a one project solution, as mentioned by the .NET MAUI community, and this slide has become obsolete already. So sorry about that. And when starting with the project, we can go two different routes with the UI. Basically, we have the old MVVM way of developing our projects, which is something we are all familiar with. And as a WPF developer, I always use MVVM. And it was first introduced in 2005, so it's been almost 2 decades, in a blog post by John Gossman. And as I mentioned in the slide, it's really never going out of style. But as time passes, we found out we had maybe different needs or want to try something new. So the .NET MAUI framework is now introducing MVU, which is the new kid in town, and it's has its origin in the functional programming language Java. And it's and both of them actually can be used to create your .NET MAUI application, delivering the same native applications, performances, and platform fidelity. You can choose either of them, or maybe even try and mix them. So this is a slide containing a small code snippet exemplifying what you can do with MVU, and its style is mostly Fluent, so it enables you to write Fluent C# UIs, and it promotes simple one-way flow of data and state management. It's basically code first. And this really helps you being very fast in updating your UI. And it also combines quite well with the hot reload just introduced by the community. And this is very, very interesting indeed. But for our projects, we went the safer route, as my background suggested, and transitioning from the older framework to the newer one, I suggest everyone to take this approach. For there are many things that you might discover while developing an OpenMAUI application and making the jump from a very older framework. And of course, if you are trying every single new thing that you can find in the framework, you are going to end up with a big headache. So I like to play it safe and to maybe use MVVM as first approach for structuring this port. Of course, as MVVM goes, we've got pages, which are basically our views, and view models, which are supplying the pages with the business logic. And I'd like to spend a little time on the binding context. Of course, if you are new to the WPF or either MAUI world, you are not aware of what that is, and I'd like to spend a few minutes on it. It's basically what binds the view and the view model together. So its main objective is that of linking these two parts so that the application and the user interactions are actually tied to some actions or logic displayed and contained by the view model. We have, however, two situations regarding this binding context. We might face two scenarios. So the first one is when binding with a parameterless or maybe primitive parameters only view model, we will be able to use a quite simplistic approach. We are linking the two of them together, which is shown in the code snippet on the right, and we can do it and play it safely. But on the other hand, if you have maybe a more complex model requiring, for example, dependency injection and such, we are going to need different things, which simply are not available as of yet in .NET, for they are often linked with more complex dependency injection framework, which as of now are not yet compatible with the newer framework. And of course, when binding a view with a view model which displays complex parameters or dependency injections, you need view model locators for matching the view with the view model. And as I was mentioning, dependency injection per se, which is an important part. And there is, as I was mentioning, no compatibility with current more popular frameworks, such as, for example, AutoFac or the likes. But however, the community is always one step ahead, and it's providing us with tools and libraries which can help us already getting on track with these missing points. We have, for example, this little plugin which helps us setting up the view model locator parts in a very simple way without much need to rely on any dependency injection framework. And talking about dependency injection, one of the main strengths of modern frameworks resides, of course, in their use of modern programming concepts, such as, for example, dependency injection itself. .NET MAUI has a default dependency injection system that, much as everything else, is configured at startup time. So in this little snippet, we are seeing that we are building up our .NET MAUI application and starting out to configure some services as singleton, adding them to the service to dependency injection container. So as I was mentioning before, some of these code snippets have already become obsolete, and this is one of them, because in the latest release candidates, which is very recent, up to I think 15 days ago, there were some breaking changes, and this kind of fluent writing is no longer supported. we have direct access now to the service collection of the app builder, so there is no need to actually address it in such way. And many things have changed between releases, so it's always a problem when you are developing and making screenshots such as this. So moving on, of course, we have to address also the issue of navigation. When I was developing the porting, I noticed that navigation seems to be available through the code behind only. So this is, of course, not such a big issue, but it's not very MVVM compliant. And I'm not sure it's either very elegant or maintainable. So when I saw this, I wanted to move away from it and maybe provide a different way of navigating between pages in the application. And we can of course do this by use of services. So since we have dependency injection and services, it's quite easy to create one. And to implement a navigation system for your app, you simply have to maybe create something like this along the lines of the interface shown in the picture. And for example, this navigation service will be maintaining an internal stack of navigation pages, which are basically your pages. And by use of those, you will be able to access the navigate APIs and to move backwards and forwards with respect to the application pages stack. And this is a better way with respect to the one currently being supported by default, because it decouples the view from the logic. And it simply works by an initial configuration when you specify a keyword attached to a certain page. And by using set keywords, you can then move either backwards or forward, or even pop up a model. And this is probably the more correct approach with respect to the navigation part. And moving on from more technical aspects, I'd like to talk a little bit about pitfalls I encountered when developing. These are mostly due to the fact that I, of course, moved from WPF to a totally more modern framework. But I'd like to mention them because the NET MAUI initiated by I also encountered them. And I'd like to start with something that really I didn't grasp at first, but it's a very useful concept. So it's the concept of compiled bindings. So for everyone who's just not used to compiled bindings, they are quite easy to be mistaken for an innocent compile time check by the compiler, but they are much more than that. In fact, they can totally hinder your compile, your application compile, and they serve the purpose of simply instructing the compiler of what the UI control is actually referring to when addressing a certain model property or class. So they're basically saying the compiler that, for example, a list view is actually referring to a certain type of collection. And if the data template is not referring to a property which is belonging to said model class, the compiler will then throw an error and will not allow you to compile the application per se. So they are much quicker than normal bindings, and they are actually a suggested way of binding your code. The only problem with that is that, of course, if you are binding the root tag of your application with a certain model, you have to be aware of what's coming next, because they actually are in inherited between different controls. So maybe you are, for example, defining that a certain content page is referring to a certain view model, and that view model is, of course, containing the application logic, the page logic. But then later in the code, you are maybe addressing a collection of some sort, which is a totally different model, and you forget about the fact to specify the set binding for with a different model. The compiler will then throw an error, which is not quite clear, I like to say, and you will spend probably the next 30 minutes wondering what you did wrong. This is what actually happened to me. It's a true story. And so compiled bindings are such that your code will not compile, as I was saying, if the binding is not properly specified between the UI control that you're using and the corresponding model. And this, of course, is very useful because it prevents the application from throwing any runtime error. This is something that I have had to struggle with during my WPF developer career, and I still struggle with. And so this is very, very useful, but it is not a very bright idea to do it at the root of your page. So, for example, in this case, I was trying to address a list view item, and I forgot about the fact that I set up earlier before a compiled binding, and the application was throwing errors. So the solution to this is very, very simple. You have to basically define what you are binding to, and each and every step you are doing so. So in this case, we've got a list view item template. We are defining the template anew, and the data template is now pointing to the right type, which is basically the item source, the related item source type. And this solved all of my problems, but that was not quite easy to get to, as I was, coming from a WPF background, as I already mentioned quite a few times. So, moving to the next issue, we have that, of course, being in a early development stage, not many controls are available as of yet. We are moving quite fast, actually, because when I was starting out with the porting, there was no tabbed page. I actually needed it, but I had to move to a different UI control. No problem at all, of course, but we were still in early stages. And as you can see right here, some of the things shown in the second image are still not quite there yet, but they are getting there. And I saw a huge jump in development in the last month. So lots of things have been covered. And of course, as I was mentioning, you are not expected to find everything that you're used to when moving from a different framework to the other, but maybe it's because we are still in early development stage. And of course, the most important parts are all there. So you can always try and use a different control. This is, of course, another issue. I know it's getting quite common to be talking about issues in the presentation, but moving from a WPF application to a .NET MAUI one was not quite as straightforward as one might think. And of course, we had to take into consideration the fact that the project structure was including, for example, a ASP.NET Core server to the solution. And this posed the question of compatibility. For example, our porting, as I was saying, required the use of ASP.NET Core, but the APIs themselves were not compatible with either iOS or Mac Catalyst. And we struggled with that a little bit, of course, as it usually goes. And we found out that one can simply bypass this problem by using compile time switches, which basically get rid of these errors and allow you to run your application basically on Windows, but they still make it compile. This is, of course, a limitation for with respect to our reporting, but it's one of the things that we choose to do in order for the application to actually be executable and compile. So this was the last slide about issues, but this was not the last issue we experienced. So before moving out to the demo, I'd like to talk about some of the problems we've had just recently. So during the last night, we had a very rough debug session because it's basically my fault. I had the very smart idea of updating the framework to the latest version. And I went from the preview version of .NET MAUI, jumping right from that to the latest release candidate. And that introduced some breaking changes, and it was a struggle, let me tell you that. And we struggled with it till midnight. And so the final, let's say, final product we have today is resembling what we had before, but it's kind of fixed with respect to what we wanted to show you. So please be kind and gentle, because the UI has totally gone bonkers. It's just basically displaying the main functionalities which we were expecting. So I'd like to ask you for a little bit of kindness. And we'll move on to the small demo right now. So, as I was saying before, the application is totally naked. We just have basically buttons and a small list view here showing up the different apps. And it didn't used to be like this. We've had, for example, right here a small navigation bar, and well, the graphics, I like to say, it has seen better days. But in order to show its functionalities, we can go with a simple REST call. And this is a GET, actually a post request that allows the web server running in the application to actually register a request by a certain app, which would like to access the following system APIs. So, for example, we'd like to read a certain file or maybe perform some other operations. This will reach the web server running behind and request the user for registering and allowing the application to access such capabilities. So, for example, by running this, we are getting this small permission request message right here, which will basically instruct the user that said application will try to access these functionalities. Of course, the user can simply go ahead and cancel the request. Nothing will change here. Or maybe we can go ahead and grant the permission to the application if we are pretty confident that this is, of course, not a malicious attempt by any user to steal our data or the such. And by doing so, we are allowing the application to be added to the list of the safe applications and to use all of the capabilities it might need. So I have prepared just a small request, but I don't think you can reach the file. So this is just to show you what the API looks like. Basically, once you have granted the application access, it can use several APIs, and it can, for example, be able to read a certain file from the desktop area, and this file will then be converted to a base 64 content and be returned back to the caller. So this is all of the demo we had for the moment. There was some other views and windows we could show you, but the navigation system we set up has totally gone away, so there is basically no way of reaching them as of now. And this being said, I'd like to be moving on to the conclusion part. And of course, this is basically what we made. And getting from the WPF application to the MAUI one was quite a journey. And the most difficult part was trying to accommodate the API project needs, for they weren't really compatible with the APIs, as we were mentioning before. And of course, we have had issues when finding the right controls to use. We didn't have any perfect 100% substitute for each of them, but we made do with what we had. And of course, the original application displayed a very useful feature, which was that the message box displayed earlier, the prompt, was actually a blocking one. In this case, however, we've had a in-view message prompt, which is not blocking the user, so it's quite different with respect to what we were going for. It's not really alerting the user as much as in the original, as it did in the original application, and we'd like to maybe find an alternative to this. For the moment, we are just stuck with the default .NET MAUI one, which is showing inside the window. And of course, we've had some issues with the view model and dependency injection part, which is not quite yet mature, and it will probably be fixed later. So what's next? Well, of course, I'd like to be able to restore the previous layout we've had since earlier this day, and of course make it work all platform-wise, and maybe wait for official .NET MAUI releases. You know, it's quite early to be developing at this stage. This is just a proof of concept, of course, but it felt quite early to be jumping right into it. And maybe it's for you that you are starting out, it's better to wait for the official release before jumping right into it, because changes are happening quite fast, and it's probably better for you to wait. And the last point is totally a wish I have, and I hope I can move on from WPF and finally go to a different, more modern framework. And that will be all, guys. Thank you.